Okay, now we're going to move on to the quick selection tool. The quick selection tool is right where the magic wand tool was. So if I click and hold on here, if you see the magic wand, all you got to do is click and hold and get to your quick selection tool unless you modified your menus. But what this will do is it'll allow me to go through and select the information that I want. All of these automatic selection tools work on contrasty edges, so you can see the contrast between him and the background is pretty good, except on his left shoulder there. So as I walk around, it does a pretty decent job, but then when it gets over here, it bleeds onto the subject, okay? So I'm going to press Command or Control D to deselect. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of a helper layer. This helper layer that I'm going to create is a curve adjustment layer. So we'll just go into curve adjustments, and I'm going to zoom in on the area that I know where the contrast is low, which is down here, okay? And I'm going to use my local adjustments, and I'm going to drag down on this area and drag up on this area, okay? And now if I press Command or Control 0, you can see this kind of looks like crap, but I've got a nice contrast, so I got a nice edge. So what I can do is then I can go into my layers, select my image layer, and go to my quick selection tool, and I got auto enhance and sample all layers on. So now if I just brush over top of my subject, you can see the only place that it starts to have some trouble is the same area. But all I have to do is then go in and select with my quick selection tool, and keep it on plus, add, okay, and just brush over and grab that information, okay. Works pretty well. I can get what I want. There's also an option that I'm going to show you. If I press Command or Control D to deselect, and then I'm going to shut off my curve adjustment layer for just a second. Go back to my quick selection tool. There's a select subject option, and this does a really nice job most of the time. Again, it works on contrast, so I'm going to have the same kind of problems in this area, but if I hit select subject, it looks at the image, uses that Adobe Sensei, and says, hey, this is your subject, so you can see it did a nicer job of picking the shirt. But if I turn this curve adjustment layer on, then I can zoom in here, and it does a pretty decent job of selecting the shirt and information there. Go back to my quick selection tool. I'm going to change my size, drop it down, keep it on the plus, and I'm going to just go through and sort of brush over this information. And don't worry if the selection looks really rough. Okay, so it looks really rough there. But the auto refine will bring it back into context. But I've got a piece that I selected out, and all I have to do is switch to my minus, and again just drag over this information to help remove it from the background. Okay, so it does a pretty decent job. And obviously the more time you spend, and this curve adjustment layer will help you refine the mask to make the mask make the selection a little more accurate, so your mask is a little more accurate. So we'll go and make this plus again, and I'm going to drag this over here, and with that curve adjustment layer, you can see it finds those edges fairly nicely. If I let go, the auto refinement kicks in. So we'll pull down. Let's pull down and make sure we got what we want down here. There's a little bit of an edge. All I need to do is either continue along, or I can switch types. So I'm going to go to my lasso selection and say I really want to add a polygonal lasso, and say I want to add this information in. I want to add some information in here, and you can click as many times to make as complicated a selection as you'd like to create to refine your selection essentially. So if I double click, I'm in add mode, press Command or Control 0, to fit to my screen. Shut off my curve selection, or my curve adjustment layer. I'm actually going to delete that. So select the actual layer itself, delete it. Now I got a nicer background than this kind of blown out sky. All I need to do is use that selection to generate a mask. And I've got that selected. And again, with the same kind of thing, I look at it and I say, well, it's nice, but it's a little too sharp. Maybe it's not as refined as I'd like. All I have to do is click on it and go to my properties panel. And I want to increase my feather, okay, to make it blend in a little more. I can continue along and go into the mask and manipulate the mask. Like there's a little halo around his hat. All I have to do is make sure the layer mask thumbnail is selected. I go to my smudge tool and I want to push this in toward the hat a little bit. And you can see, just like previous examples, I'm getting rid of the halo around his hat. Okay, and that's just one way. There's a ton of different ways to do mask refinements, but this is one way where you can manipulate and tweak. So your selections are the basis of a good mask, and quick select is probably one of the most common. It's extremely useful, and the select subject does a nice job depending on the amount of contrast you have. And we'll go on to the next one after this.